But let's talk to Gareth Bacon, Conservative MP for Orpington. Gareth, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I might come back to the crime question in a minute, but let's talk about the ULEZ decision last Friday, because obviously an awful lot of people were very disappointed that the judicial review went in Sadiq Khan's favour. He doesn't seem to be interested in listening to anybody who's against it. He's going full steam ahead. What's your reaction? Is there likely to be some kind of pressure brought to bear against him?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think the first thing on the judicial review, the thing to bear in mind is that judicial reviews are not about whether the policy is good or not. It's about the process that was followed to implement the policy. So it's been written up, I think incorrectly, in various media outlets, as though this is a gigantic triumph for the mayor. I don't think it is. It would have been a disaster for the mayor if the JR had gone against him, because it would have shown that his process had been unlawful. So the question remains, is this good policy? And I think it's very clearly not. And as you know, I've been sort of pushing against this very hard for quite a long time now. And what I can also say to you, on a day when there were 3 by-elections, 2 of which were statistically a lot safer than Uxbridge, and the Conservative Party was around about 20 points behind in the polls nationally, we won in Uxbridge. Now, I went there several times, including on polling day, and I can tell you categorically that the reason why we won that election was opposition to the ultra-low emission zone expansion, which would, of course, impact on Uxbridge. Now, I think what the Prime Minister said in recent days about being on the side of the motorist and reviewing LTNs and things, I think that's excellent. I think that's a really good first step. But I would be encouraging him to go further, and I think the government should take a very long, hard look at the ULEZ expansion and see what they can do to stop it.
I mean, low traffic neighbourhoods notwithstanding, and sort of reviews of things notwithstanding, I think people would like to see something a bit more concrete in terms of Rishi Sunak saying, well, we're going to overrule Sadiq Khan here, because he could do that. And I know I've spoken to MPs in the past who have said that he could, but it's a process. It may be not something he wants to do, but he could do it. And I wonder whether if Rishi Sunak really is the friend to the motorist, that could actually save the Tory Party in the next election.
Well, I'm certainly going to be making the argument because Section 143 of the GLA Act 1999 does appear to give the Secretary of State the power to direct the Mayor of London over the Mayor of London's transport strategy, provided certain conditions are met. Now, I think that they are. Apparently, Department for Transport lawyers have suggested that it's more complicated than that, and they don't. One of the things that I'm going to be asking for in weeks ahead is to see that legal advice and to get it reality tested with outside counsel, because I'm not sure that they're right about that. But if they are right about that, we have a King's Speech coming up on the 7th of November. Now, my colleague Theresa Villiers had a 10-minute rule bill a few weeks ago, which is permission to bring a private member's bill, which was granted, and the second reading of that bill was due to be on the 24th of November. Now, because of the King's Speech on the 7th, that will fall. But what her bill was about removing the power from mayors and from local authorities to implement charges such as this, to make it absolutely unambiguous that the government would have the power to do that. So if Section 143 of the GLA Act 1999 doesn't give the government power, then I think the government should give serious consideration to adopting Theresa's bill and putting that in the King's Speech. It need not be a long bill, need not take up lots of parliamentary time, but I think it would be cheered to the echo by my constituents, by the whole of Outer London, by people who live outside Greater London, all of whom are going to be ravaged by this tax that the Mayor wants to impose on them.
Yeah, because there's definitely a feeling in my view anyway in the country that the whole sort of rush to net zero, the rush to try and punish people for driving is kind of wearing very thin on an awful lot of people. I mean, we've got Rishi Sunak talking about committing himself to pressing ahead with oil and gas exploration, front page of the Times today, which will make a difference between hopefully cheaper energy and more homegrown energy, and it will make a difference between Tory and Labour Party policy. So, I mean, if he's willing to go down that road, then he might just need a little bit of help from people like yourself.
Well, and I agree, and I fully support what the Prime Minister is doing on that as well, because whilst it would be very nice for the world to get to net zero, and I don't think anybody would particularly argue with that as a concept, between now and then there's...
Well, I would argue it's a concept because I don't think anybody understands the concept at all. I don't think anybody knows what net zero really is, what happens when you get there, and how you even manage to convince anybody else it's a great idea. People just kind of nod knowingly because they're too frightened to say they think it's a stupid idea and it's costing us too much money.
Yeah, well, that's the point, isn't it? Because getting to that point, I found myself in the astonishing situation of agreeing with every word that Tony Blair said last week.
Yeah.
When he pointed out that we're a small island in the greater scheme of things across the whole of the world. And China has produced more emissions in the last 8 years than this country has since the Industrial Revolution. And when you weigh that on the scale, and you think that we are currently sitting at 1% of global emissions coming from our country, to get to zero would cost us quite a lot of money and impoverish quite a large number of people. You then have to start questioning the sanity of doing it when China is increasing their emissions by more than we could possibly reduce ours.
Yeah.
Start to think, well, actually, this needs a global response, not a national response. Because actually, nationally, we've been doing pretty well for about 30 years. We've been reducing our emissions to the stage where we are now. So whilst getting the world to global zero might be a noble concept, I think between now and then it's not going to be straightforward.
Well, noble concepts are all very well, aren't they? But you know, usually that's you do noble things when you can afford to. You don't do them when you can't afford to do them.
Well, quite, and you know, we're facing a situation where people are really starting to feel the pinch in this country. That's one of the reasons why I think the ultra-low emission zone expansion is such a crazy idea, especially coming from a man who goes on about the cost of living all the time.
Right. And also, you know, he won't admit what is the truth of it, which is one, the air quality in London is better now than it's ever been. Two, actually, he's not about trying to make the air cleaner. He's about charging you for polluting it. Precisely
right, and that's the thing. I mean, he was unwise enough in public to say that this was as bold a step as banning smoking in pubs. But you see, nobody said you can carry on smoking in pubs provided you pay £12.50.
Right.
Because logically, that doesn't make any sense at all, does it? Because the air will still be unclean. So it's not going to clean up the air, charging people. It's just going to impoverish them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's been the hole in the heart of the whole of this thing, all the way along the line. It really is a revenue-raising measure. And we know what's going to happen, because TfL's defence line is, well, it's all very well, because we're not going to make any money in 2 years, because the air will be clean by then and nobody will be driving and polluting vehicles, which is precisely why they've been advertising to bring in engineers to look at per-mile road charging.
Yeah.
What they really want to do is have an excuse to put the cameras up so they can then use that for an even more expensive scheme that captures everybody in the near future.
Because unfortunately, what we now have in this country is a very, very over-dependent state, and they're over-dependent on taxpayers, and they want so much money because government has got so big, and I mean local and national government, that, you know, they just have to keep rinsing the taxpayer. And at some point or other, we're all going to go, no more. Thank you very much indeed. I don't want to pay that.
Well, and I think we are approaching that point. I mean, you know, ULEZ comes up on every door. I was canvassing in Orpington on Saturday morning, and again and again and again, it was coming up on the doorstep. People were stopping me in the street and talking about it. So it's really penetrated people's consciousness. It's become this sort of, I suppose, it's almost like a totem for people now, ULEZ. But I think you're right. I think it's part of a wider problem. And that is that the state has become too large. And as a result of that, taxes have risen far too high. And that has a consequent knock-on for economic growth as well. So we are going to have a serious think in this country about what government is for and how it goes on in the long term.
Yeah, and I think Transport for London could learn a thing or two about slimming itself down as well, because they've got massive numbers of people earning vast amounts of money, doing very little, it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, TfL is bloated. I mean, the irony of this is that when Sadiq became mayor in 2016, his line was that TfL was good but flabby.
Yeah.
He could never actually define what flabby meant in the concept of TfL. And it's only got flabbier since then. He's done absolutely nothing to try to reform it. And as we know, the pandemic exposed the financial weakness of Transport for London, which has led us to where we are now. Absolutely
right. Final question for you. I don't know whether you've seen this story about the Shadow Treasury Minister, Rabina Opong Asari, who got herself a parking ticket while she was parked outside a constituency office and decided to charge it to the taxpayer, 55 quid. Thanks very much.
No, I hadn't seen that. I hesitate to comment on that, other than to say that parking tickets in your own constituency really are the responsibility of anybody who is parking their vehicle. Well,
parking tickets, period, I would have thought, not just in your own constituency. Ian Duncan Smith says Starmer should get rid of her, I presume just as shadow minister rather than as actual MP.
Well, yes, I mean, I don't think he'd have the power to get rid of her as an MP, but he would have the opportunity to remove her from the shadow cabinet. Yeah, I would have thought MPs would have learned their lesson about, you know, expenses some years ago, but there we are.